Your investigation is important to all of us in the world. I'd like to begin with that idea of the virus spreading initially through frozen food. That does, as Nick was suggesting, match up with a narrative offered by the Chinese government that has been widely disputed by other scientists. On a personal level, for anyone listening, that is worrying. Can you help us understand why you think it may have unfolded like that?
Well, we're talking about something very different right now than, a package of frozen fish from somewhere else in the world. We're talking about the origins of SARS-CoV-2, the COVID outbreak, in a market in Woohan, the likely center of it, the early spreading of that outbreak. And what we see there when we visit that market is a place that sold a lot of frozen products, not just the typical things we would buy in the supermarket, but also frozen animal products from animal farms in Southeast Asia and inside China. And there is a really striking piece of evidence that was mentioned today in the press conference that in those products were included wildlife, meat, and carcasses from animals that we know are susceptible to coronaviruses, and also that the supply chains come from places in China where we know the SARS coronavirus 2 related viruses are. In other words, a direct link from the potential bat origins of this virus, which most scientists believe is true, into Wuhan market. Now, scientists in China tested those carcasses and they were negative, so that's good. But we don't know what else was there. We don't really know if there were live animals there, so there's no evidence of that, but we don't know. And we don't know how many of these animals were part of that frozen market or even other types of meat. So, to many of us on the team, it was a clear clue as to what may have happened. And it was one of the pathways that we thought was more likely than others, for sure.
Let me just be quite clear about this then. It's one of those pathways that might be more likely, you say, and that's an agreement that you made as a team. But I'm struggling to understand specific evidence that you have to support this contention, sir, with respect.
Well, the specific evidence comes from the work that China's been doing, that Chinese scientists have been doing from really day one of the outbreak. So around about January the 1st, scientists from China CDC went into the market and started swabbing the market. They looked at sewage, they looked at stalls where they sold food, they looked at the stalls where the people were positive for coronavirus. They spent about a month in there swabbing, testing, over 900 samples collected, a really thorough, deep study. Most of the animals' products had gone, but there were some still there. If there were live animals in the market, we think mainly aquatic animals, but we don't know. There are rumours of live mammals in that market. But what was really intriguing was this find of carcasses of animals, mammals, actually ferret badgers, which are a type of animal that's widely eaten across Southeast Asia, which we know has the capacity to be infected by coronaviruses, in the frozen products, tested negative, but only a few. So that tells you that there's potentially more going on in that market early on. And this is a potential for a way that a virus could get in. There are two other pathways we looked at. One, that it could have been brought in by people from another part of Wuhan. And you heard that some of by the time the early cases in December were known about, it looks to the epidemiologists on the team that this virus was already spreading pretty widely in the community. And there's evidence that some people were infected that weren't associated with the market. So a person could have brought it in. And then finally, there's this widely discussed hypothesis that the cold chain of frozen food from other places, like abroad, could have brought it in. Now, that's, in my opinion, less likely, but it's possible. So we kept it in there as a potential to do further work on. It's fairly straightforward to go out and start testing those to see what the possibility of that pathway is. But from my opinion, and I'm very interested in the animal link to these pandemics, there was a clear potential for an animal link from animals we know are susceptible into that market.
Okay, on the frozen food issue, what I understand from what you've just said is that there isn't this isn't evidence that you as a team have found. This is This is work that the Chinese have been doing, that you have listened to and taken on board, and so that's work that China has done as opposed to the work that the WHO has done, gleaned and found evidence of. All right. What about the earliest case, as you understand it? Just explain what you have learned.
Well, we had a team of epidemiologists in the group working with a really good team from China. I mean, this is a joint effort. You know, they go out and collect all this data over the past year, and we sit down and analyze it together, go through the studies, and then they go out and gather more information, and really digging into were the clusters of, excess mortality that could have suggested COVID was around a lot earlier in Wuhan, or even the province around Wuhan, or were there unusual respiratory disease patterns that were picked up in the local clinics that suggest there were spikes in outbreaks. Very important to do that, because what it tells us is, was this thing spreading in the community for much longer than we thought, and could it have come from somewhere else? And I think it's a very important finding, but the EPI team are pretty convinced there are no clear clusters of outbreaks of that type from those data earlier than December. And it looks like there was no significant spread of this disease earlier than December. There may have been a few sporadic cases here and there. We don't know. We need to look further. But that's important. So it really does look like this event in Wuhan happened there. It happened early, in early December. It was picked up actually fairly quickly. It was an explosive event linked to markets in and around Wuhan.
Peter, do we have a patient zero?
Not yet. But, we often never get to patient zero. I mean, patient zero could be someone who died, an elderly person who died of pneumonia, which is common. It could be someone who doesn't ever know that they're infected. We now know from COVID, you can be asymptomatic. You can just have mild symptoms. Everyone gets a cold in the winter. It can be someone who never knew they had the disease. It's very hard to get to patient zero, but there's a lot you can learn by looking at this traceback of cluster events. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for small clusters of outbreaks that went to a clinic because they were severe and the symptoms were just like COVID. That didn't happen. We didn't see that in the data earlier than December. Very important finding.